Should we introduce ourselves first, since we may have new people that don't know us?
Oh, sure. You're gonna have to deal with that delay, though.
I know there is a time delay, so people in the comments in the chat, you can listen to us ramble until we actually get to this point. And if you do ask a question in the chat, give us some time to answer, because I think it's like a minute and a half delay. And we may not see your question until, there's just going to be a weird delay there with the whole chat and the audio. So we'll put up with it. We'll deal with it. We'll go forward. And I see a bunch of chats that it all worked. And eventually they'll hear that we see that it worked.
Yeah. I hope you were taking notes. You're going to have to remember how to do this next time.
I think I have it now. You might need to be over the bottom right and turn up the sound. Why is everybody blaming me? You started this. Okay, Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Scott. Good enough for you?
Sure. What do you do, Scott?
Stuff. I do stuff and things. Yeah. I am the half of this podcast that lives in Azure land and talks about all things Azure. And I'm a former recovering SharePoint addict.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. We all are in some way or another.
Yes, I have already seen some recovering SharePoint, or still people that are hooked on SharePoint like me. So I am Ben. I have been hanging out here. I had the session earlier on something. Oh, Power Automate, Azure Automation, that type of stuff. I'm the Office 365 half of the podcast, or Microsoft 365 half, depending on how you want to label the mess of naming. Yeah.
It is going to be Microsoft 365, because let's face it, even when they release new Azure services, they are somehow pegged to Microsoft 365 subscriptions. Blows my mind every time.
But yet Microsoft 365 is not really Microsoft 365. Office 365 is still another product. This was a whole podcast we did a while back anyways. Go find that one if you want to hear our Microsoft Office 365 debate.
Oh no, they just did it again this week. You didn't see?
What did they do again this week?
Well, they released a brand new service in Azure called Universal Print, right? Have you seen this one?
No.
All right.
I have not.
Well,
I think I might have seen the headline, but I didn't actually read it. So what is Universal Print?
Universal Print is a cloud-based print server where all the configuration for your printers, so think like a printer target for a client, it lives in Azure. So you can go into Azure and you can configure a print service. And within that service, you can configure multiple printers using a what's called a universal printer connector, or Microsoft is working with vendors. Canon's the first one to build universal print directly into their printers. You register those printers with this universal print service inside of Azure, and then your clients can automatically be presented those printers with zero configuration. So think like pushing a printer configuration through Intune based on an Azure AD joined or Azure AD registered client that's in your directory.
Interesting. So how do you set this up? Because I'm guessing printers, they have to be network attached printers where they have some type of IP address, or are they connected to a server and you still need that server to push the printer to the cloud?
I haven't played with it personally because it's in private preview. I filled out the form, but I haven't been accepted to it. But looking at the documentation for the way it's set up, it looks like it's probably using service bus relays, which are those little agents that Microsoft uses for things like seamless or single sign-on through Azure AD Connect. They have the whole hybrid relay service. So it's just, these little tunnels that are established outbound from your network that go ahead and talk up to Azure. So your printer configurations live in Azure. Clients see those. They push a print job to that cloud thing. The cloud thing talks to the thing on-prem for you through the little tunnel, and then boom, kicks out your print job.
Got it.
But you don't need to go into something like GPO and light up all your printers, or have a big print server that then, potentially you have to manage through on-prem.
So is there some way you can set up that tunnel then on like a firewall, or because you still need to have that tunnel configured somewhere?
Well, you wouldn't have to. That's the magic of a service bus relay. Is all you need is outbound internet access
Got it.
from the thing that connects to it.
From the thing. Okay.
So it's all just HTTPS, port 443, TCP outbound. Nice and easy. Layer 7, all the way.
Nifty.
Yeah.
So now you can use Azure to print to a printer that's sitting in your office, and now you have no way to go get the paper that's sitting on the printer because you're working at Starbucks.
Well, hold on. The configuration's in Azure, but it is going to be in a Microsoft 365 subscription service.
Got it. Interesting.
So, back to that whole, the world gets muddied up between those two things. They're proving it out in real time.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to try. Maybe I'll have to see if I can get into the private preview, me and my single license and my single printer, and see if it would even work.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you know what else they announced this week that caused a stir? They did announce stuff. They announced that for organizations now under 5,000 people, because that's the limit in Teams, they are going to start auto-creating an organizational-wide team automatically when you stand up your tenant.
I love these opt-in by default services.
Yeah,
they are just so fun.
So this was an interesting one. We'll throw links to Twitter in the show notes, and I can try to throw some of these in the chat too if people want to go look at these while we're recording this one live. I'll throw all three of these links in there. But there was some debate around this one. Oh, that did not work well, throwing all those links together. There are 3 links in there if you're looking at this in the chat. They just all kind of run together. But they do let you click on 3 separate ones. Is this a good idea or not? So some people chimed in on that Twitter stream and said, well, isn't everything on by default? And the way I look at this one is, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's on by default, but I don't know that I want stuff being created within my tenant by default. Sure, Exchange is turned on by default. Teams is turned on by default. You can go assign licenses. All these things get spun up by default. But now if you're going to go start creating an organizational-wide team that's going to create a SharePoint site, it's going to join all my members into the team, it's actually creating stuff, not just turning stuff on by default. I don't know that I like that. I don't want to have to go in and every tenant I stand up, delete it because my client's not quite ready to roll out Teams.
You don't want to have to deal with all the extra artifacts that come with that group that now is going to be automatically managed by Microsoft, and all the email addresses and the files and all the other things that come with it.
Right. Like it feels like this should be a setting. And if they want to turn this on by default, or they want to have this as an option, go ahead and give me a checkbox in my initial way to stand up that my tenant. So I go sign up for a tenant. I go through the whole setup wizard, the configuration wizard, and give me a checkbox that says, yeah, set up an organizational-wide team by default. Great. I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with them creating it. I just want to have that option. Going back to a bunch of things I feel like they've done recently is creating stuff and turning stuff on by default that feels like it should be a choice of, do I want this in my tenant or not?
Yeah, well, at least for this one, you have to be a global admin, right, to go and light it up or turn it down. So you do have an opportunity to kind of potentially step in and at least turn it off later.
Right, like delete it as soon as the tenant gets created.
Yeah. But nobody's hopefully been in there at that point. Right. And unfortunately, the reality is this stuff has been very much on by default. You see a lot of the announcements come out and they say, oh, okay, it's going to be on by default, but there's an admin experience, and there's really not, right? There's just not much there on day one for a lot of this stuff when they light it up. But you've got to kind of deal with it and figure out what that reality is. I think the issue is, okay, light it up by default. That's great. You turned it on, but can you give me a way? Like, how does it surface that to me when I create a new tenant? So I'm walking through the creation screen. It's the last step of the creation screen saying, oh, by the way, here's this thing I'm lighting up for you. So you can at least evaluate if you want to do it. Like, what's the adoption look like? And, how are you going to drive users into that if you want to, or turn it off because maybe you want to use Yammer because you're doing that like whole outer loop thing. I don't know. It's a weird one.
Yeah, I agree. That was just strange. And it is becoming a pattern lately. And not to knock on Microsoft and them driving usage, but I feel like a lot of these decisions are exactly that. It's driven by usage. They want usage numbers. They want people to use it. So they start lighting all these up because, let's face it, if you have an organizational-wide team that gets spun up by default when you create your tenant, all of a sudden they can say, hey, we got 2,000 new users that are in teams because it was spun up, they got added to it, and the usage numbers get impacted by those. Again, that's just me speculating my opinion. I see a lot of comments in the chat that say it should definitely be off by default, and this should be a choice.
User voice, right? There's got to be a user voice out there.
User voice. Someone go create a user voice.
One. Yeah. And we'll see where that lands up. But I think if you do turn it on, Microsoft does offer some guidance about ways that you can potentially make it more usable. So if it's going to be there and it's going to be on by default, I wish they actually went and configured some of these things for you too, since they consider them to be best practices. Specifically, only allowing team members to post to the general channel. So you can change things like permissions in your general channel where only owners can post messages. And because the global admin's the one who created the org-wide team, they would be the only one who could post a message to that particular channel, to general. And the other thing you can fix is tagging. So doing kind of @ mentions for teams or team names within your channel, and just like turn that all the way off so that nobody can tag general or tag any of those additional channels that are in there. Because the noise could be kind of crazy with 5,000 people. I'm in a couple of teams that have thousands and thousands of people, and it's chatty. Like it's really hard to pay attention and figure things out. And when somebody does accidentally tag the general channel, they just get piled on because they get 30 responses within 30 seconds that say, hey, don't ever tag @ general because there's hundreds or thousands of people in this team.
Right. So this is interesting because we had a conversation earlier this week in one of the sessions. One of the Gregs, there's a lot of Gregs that have popped up in the chat, where we were talking about Yammer versus Teams when you start getting up around those 5,000 people. And is Teams really a suitable platform for 5,000 people? And this is going to be my plug for Mark and the GlobalCon2. And this kind of turned into that the next conference we should do cage matches where we get two people on to debate like Yammer or Teams, or debating even like OneNote versus Evernote, or Planner versus To-Do, or do like these debate style, discussion style sessions where we actually get on and discuss competing products or even competing Microsoft products within the suite, and just try to help people flesh that out, because some of that stuff can be very confusing. And it's like, when do you use what, and what are the pros and cons of these different tools when you get at certain levels and all that. So
yeah, I mean, it'd certainly be fun to do. I think you'd have to have the right voices in the room. Like, you certainly don't want the always contrarians. So somebody like me is probably not a good person to have in a room like that.
And people that can get along, because let's face it, there are some people that like are so argumentative that it would just turn into a massive fight. Yes, people that are friendly, that can actually carry on a friendly discussion debate without legitimately getting mad at each other, because I have seen that happen.
Nah, never happens.
Anyways, other news. Since nobody's asking questions, if you guys want us to answer questions and not just keep going through the news and discussing this random news stuff that we pulled together, definitely. Ooh, somebody called it a Royal Rumble. Let us know and throw questions out there, and we can always divert from our news and answer questions as well if people want us to do that. Do you want to do another Teams one that is relevant
Teams
for today?
This is
kind of
Did they release more stuff for Teams?
They did not release more stuff for Teams. A product death match is what Fraser said. No, the whole Office 365 E1 trial and the premium Teams features included with that one. Should we talk about that one
Sure.
next?
Yeah. There's this little thing in the news. It's called the coronavirus. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. And
No,
it
never.
is causing organizations and municipalities and general parts of the world to shut down or adopt different ways of working. So things like maybe a work from home policy. Seems like most of Seattle is kind of, closed down right now, at least over here in the US, and everybody's working from home at Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon and all sorts of other places, at least through most of March. So one of the things that Microsoft has announced as a part of this and kind of positioning companies to be able to continue doing business while they're remote is they've announced a free Office 365 E1 trial for 6 months. If you're looking to potentially take your business online in some different ways and get people out of the office but still keep them in touch and have them able to communicate through something like Teams.
Yeah, this was kind of a cool offering, and it looks like this is. I don't know how they're doing this on the background. I think it rolls out March 10th, so in 4 days. It's not something that's live now, or if they're going to light this up in those E1 trials starting on March 10. It was a little vague on how they're doing this, but they're including some of those premium Teams features, it sounds like, in E1, where they're lighting up, like they're eliminating some of the limits around how many people can join a team and some of the dial-in for conference features they're including in that. So they're not only giving you that Office 365 E1 trial for 6 months, but it sounds like they're also lighting up some additional Teams features for free as a part of that E1 trial.
Yeah, it seems like it's akin to kind of the E1 and the Teams exploratory experience, kind of meeting up in the middle and being available for 6 months. And if you do opt to go down this path, there's a couple of things that you have to do or that you potentially have to be positioned for to make this happen. So the first thing is you cannot just go out and sign up for an E1 trial and then have these capabilities lit up for you. Specifically the team stuff, right? You'll get all the things that come with the E1, but not some of those additive calling features that you just mentioned there. It is, you have to be an organization who has an account representative. So you're going to have to be maybe a little bit bigger. And you'll reach out to your account rep. Your account rep will say, like, yes, you are eligible to do this. You haven't already done an E1 trial or anything else along the way. And they'll send you a promo code. You'll activate through that promo code, and then you'll be lit up for 6 months. And if you want to keep going past 6 months at that point, you can upgrade your licenses. Microsoft won't delete your data or do anything like that with it. You'll just have to light up and license your users, and then they can carry forward and get to where they need to be.
Nice. That sounds good. It's kind of nice. I saw, even though this is Microsoft, Google's doing something similar with G Suite and enabling some additional features in their tool as well, working from home. I think WebEx, I saw, did it, and a
correct.
bunch of
WebEx is also free for a couple months.
Yep. We got questions starting to come in now, Scott. Is the Teams Outlook interface live yet? Brian, I don't believe so. I saw this in the announcements. I think I was digging into this the other day because I wanted to know about it as well. I believe that goes live or they're going to start rolling it out in April, maybe.
Is that the whole respond in Teams thing? Where you get an email. Yeah. I haven't seen it in any of my clients yet, but I'm in a mix of computers. So I'm on some that are on like semi-annual. And then, I've got my monthlies, and I have to go check some of the PCs that are on some of the insider rings.
Yeah, all of mine, I try to get mine on as many insider stuff as I can. And I have not seen it anywhere yet either. Erica had a question. Erica's been on the podcast before too.
She has.
Yes. Maybe we should get him on again sometime. Erica was wondering about technically using like Teams Live to run virtual user group meetings, allow external users to present on the live event, and anonymous That happens sometimes when we record. That's why I have an editor. Anonymous users to attend. I have not tried this yet, Erica. I mean,
I think you could.
technically you could. I don't see any reason why you couldn't. The only thing I've run into with Teams is you run into some of those goofy permissions. It's kind of like the Skype for Business. They had like the whole production for the live events where you have to have a producer and an owner, and you have to have a few roles to manage it all. I think if you had 2 or 3 people that could kind of help facilitate some of that, I think it would be hard to do as one person, but I think if you had a couple, 3 people, I don't know why you couldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how big those events kind of are and what they look like. So I work for a training company for a learning partner, and we do online virtual training. And, one of our things with coronavirus is we're doing less travel and we're spending more time at home, but we're still doing the same number of deliveries and classes. We're just doing those virtually now. So rather than being in a room of 20 to 50 people, I'm in a virtual classroom and managing all of that myself. It's totally doable.
Okay, and you're doing all of that then in Teams?
We use GoToTraining, but yes, some customers do have us using other things.
Using other products.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, because I've thought about it. Like, we've used Zoom before for webinars, and I've done different software for webinars, and everything I've looked at with the Teams Live, I will give it the caveat that I haven't actually tried to do a webinar using Teams yet, but everything I've seen says Teams would be perfectly suitable for doing a webinar, and you definitely have that ability to pull other people in, to make them co-presenters, to do their audio, their screen share, all of that. So I agree. I think it's definitely something you can do.
Yeah, well, let's try it next week. What else we got going
on? Mark had a question.
Mark always has questions.
Mark, I know. He's kind of needy. No, we love you, Mark. How did we get the idea for the podcast? I suckered you in.
Yeah, you did sucker me in.
So yeah, I not to take all the credit, but I'm going to. I had the idea for it. I was talking to Andrew Connell about it for a while because he has his podcast, the Microsoft Cloud Show. And he and I are actually both in the same city. We meet up somewhat regularly for lunch, for working together, just see each other even around town sometimes. And he's obviously a lot more developer focused. And he and CJ were doing their podcast, and they tended to do some of the developer stuff. And I kept talking to him like, you know what? I should just do an IT Pro podcast. I should do something that focuses a little bit more on admins. And he was like, you should do it. And it took us some convincing from him just to start it. And that's kind of how it all just came about, was through that relationship, through some of his encouragement. And then I didn't want to do it by myself. So
yeah, they're hard to do on your own.
Right. They really are. And there's
put that out there.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do it with somebody, to have that debate, to have that discussion, to be able to go back and forth with each other. Because if you listen to us, you know that at times we will have different opinions. So I asked AC, I was like, I want to do it with somebody. Who should I get? And he actually recommended Scott. So AC actually gets a lot of credit for this. So I went and asked Scott. You were doing one with Dan at the time, Dan Usher. Sort of.
Yeah. I used to do one, but it was a little more ranty than this.
You guys, I did listen to yours. You guys were a little ranty, and you guys were a little bit more. You talked about all kinds of random stuff too. Like you had an whole episode where you spent like 20 minutes on 1Password. So
1Password's awesome. We can do that later though.
It is. I like 1Password. But yeah, then I came and I asked you, and I was like, hey, do you want to do one with me as well? Let's keep it focused on admins on Office 365 on Azure. And that is kind of how it came about. So for those of you that haven't listened or are kind of new to the podcast, it has been almost exactly 3 years now. Because it was March or April 3 years ago that we started this? It was a while ago.
Yeah, about 3 years.
Yeah. So, and we have not, I don't believe we have missed a week, have we? I think we've released one every Thursday for the last 3 years.
We have, and we've even released like 10 in a week sometimes.
Yeah, those Ignite conferences. Yeah, that's how we ended up at a little more than 150. We're at 100. What is this? 168. Yeah, 168.
This will be 168. Yeah.
So there have been a few weeks we've released a few more. Uh, Lori asks Scott, that's a developer question, and he's a secret closet developer in his past life. Any word on when the full Teams client API, including call control, is coming?
I have
this
no idea.
Is killing
Don't
us
ask me.
to move from Skype to Teams Voice. I actually don't have any idea either, Lori. I'd have to go dig into it, but I do not have any insight into this or any idea about it. I'm clueless. Going back to the whole IT Pro thing, I try to avoid IT Pro stuff. Oh, here's another question.
Trying to avoid the developer thing.
Developer things.
You don't always get to.
This is what happens when you're reading and talking at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's why we let you do it.
Oh, this is a fun one. So is it Amin said, what are your thoughts about big companies that prefer to store their data in their servers instead of the cloud? And there are several countries which oblige their state enterprises to do that instead of working on the cloud. I have lots of thoughts here.
I'm surprised.
Are you?
Not really.
How will we celebrate Show 200? Fireworks. Sure. Well, we'd have to do video for that. I don't know. Okay, back to this question. We do get sidetracked at times. I have seen some compliance reasons for this, even here in the US. So I know of one company here in the US where they have multiple business units, and by law, because of the different businesses this parent company owns, they have to guarantee, due to US law, that data from these two different business entities or multiple business entities are stored on independent hardware. These businesses are not allowed to share hardware by law. Obviously, something like that, it is not even necessarily that preference, but it is a requirement by law because it is really hard to guarantee that your data is going to be on separate hardware when it comes to the cloud, unless you're able to store it in two different countries and use some of the newer geo, I'm blanking on the name, but some of that geo functionality now that's in Office 365 to make sure your data resides in a certain spot.
Yeah, that doesn't always help you out from a hardware perspective, though. There are things in some cloud providers. So if I'm in Azure or AWS, I can go and spin up dedicated hardware. So I can do a dedicated host, but that isn't guaranteed to be in a certain rack or even a certain place within a data center as it comes up and comes down, and you're putting workloads, in and out of it. And AWS lets you do similar things. You do bare metal VMware and things like that. I think you have to decide, like, if you're subject to import export restrictions. Like I did a project in the way back when with a company that made satellite components for the US government, and due to ITAR restrictions, like certain parts of their data, absolutely, like you said, they had to stay on-prem, they had to be managed in certain ways and do things, but it was just that data. It wasn't everything that existed out there. So you kind of have to pick and choose, and hopefully over time, you can see some of the benefits of hybrid computing and really hybrid cloud in there. I think one of the things that's going to happen is you are going to see you're going to see the world change in some interesting ways. Like we're already seeing in a lot of public cloud providers that the scale they offer are just things that we can't do on premises. So if I want to have a machine learning service, or I want to do some of these new things with bots or AI, I want to use new processors. I would like to do things with ARM processors at scale. You just can't do it in your data center. So it totally makes sense to go out to a public provider and have them give you that functionality, right? That's why they're there. They have the compute available. They're ready to go, and they have those things. So why not take advantage of that for the workloads where it makes sense? And if you have stuff on-prem that needs to stay on-prem, leave that stuff on-prem. Like, that's okay. I think that message, at least from Microsoft for a long time, was really kind of muddied up. And they used to tell you like your data either has to stay on-prem or it has to come to the cloud. And that wasn't a good place to be. But I think the reality of the situation today is your data can be on-prem when it needs to be on-prem. It can be in the cloud when it needs to be in the cloud. And, particularly if you're like a public facing company and you're building products or widgets or things that are exposed to the outside world, the reality is your competitors are going to be able to move better, faster, quicker, all the things than you, because they've adopted some services and things that you don't have access to.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then there is the other side of this where, like Eamon said, it's more of a preference. And when people say, I prefer it to be on-prem because it's more secure, or I prefer it to be on-prem for this reason or another, for compliance reasons, that's where that bugs me, to be perfectly honest, because you look at the amount of effort Microsoft puts into their security. They're 2,000 plus people. They're monitoring millions and millions, if not billions, of data points a day from a security perspective, their physical security around their data centers. There is no way many companies, if any companies, can compete with their or compete with the level of security, both physically and digitally, that Microsoft puts into Office 365. And even from a perspective of who has the most to lose, when it comes down to it, who has the most to lose when it comes to securing your environment? Is it Microsoft or is it you? If Microsoft's security is breached, there are way more companies that are going to be affected than if your company is breached. So Microsoft is going to put a ton of focus into Office 365. Some of the compliance things people will even bring up, well, but it's on the internet. It can be accessed from anywhere. You start looking at some of the stuff you can do with conditional access in terms of locking access down by IP address with conditional access. I have clients where you still have to VPN into their network to get to Office 365 because they have it locked down with conditional access where your IP address has to come from one of their public endpoints. And you can do the mobile application management. You can lock it down so it's only hybrid Azure AD joined devices. There are a lot of security and compliance controls that Microsoft puts in place, especially in that conditional access space, to make sure that you stay compliant, that you can stay secure, that you can lock down a lot of that stuff just as much as you can on premises, if not even more so. So I think there's definitely a difference there when it's legal reasons, and yeah, there's very valid reasons for that. There's, like you said, you can do the hybrid stuff, but then there's a lot of people where it's purely just a preference. And I would argue that that comes from a lack of understanding or something else that is driving that. It's not really a security or compliance thing. My two cents.
I mean, the fear thing is a factor, right? Where people don't maybe understand a new technology. And I can understand a lot of that hesitation. Like very often when you go into the cloud, whether you're going to say Office 365 as a SaaS product, or even going into Azure, like it starts to get more expensive, and it gets expensive very quickly, mostly because it points out holes in kind of like chinks in your armor. So like take like a virtual machine, for example. You might look on-prem and say like, okay, so I've got VMware, I've got ESX, I can find a way to rationalize my licensing for that. So certainly I have my licenses for VMware. I've got my cost of my host. I've got electricity. I've got HVAC. I've got people time to manage it. You kind of figure all that out, put it together. And then you go, all right, so I run this VM for this workload and it's a single instance VM. And because your VMware environment was maxed out, you could only ever run it as a single instance VM. So you go to Azure and you're like, well, I want more uptime. I want a better SLA. So all of a sudden you end up in something like availability sets. So what was one VM becomes two VMs, and it just doubled your cost, but you got a little bit more out of it. And now you're really scared because you go, oh, now the cloud's so much more expensive. And it really wasn't. It was that you made some improvement along the way, or you chose to go down a certain path to get there. And I think the other thing that really scares people is they get that bill and they don't know what's coming. They're just not positioned for it and not ready to go. Like, it's not unheard of to hear about companies that say spin up something like a machine learning service, and they go ahead and chunk a bunch of data through a big data lake, and they churn and do a ton of ETL, and then it costs them thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands sometimes in a single month, just to do this like data workload that they thought was going to be a light thing. Like, well, sorry, you didn't understand the tool. Like, whose fault is that? Is that the vendor's fault? Is that your fault? Like, where does that lie, and how does it come to play?
Yeah, you can tell we don't have any opinions on this whole cloud versus on-prem thing at all, do we? There was one, I'm going to branch off to an announcement, because there was one announcement too that was related to the whole compliance thing, is with SharePoint Online and data loss prevention. There used to be a little bit of a gap there because access wasn't blocked on data that had sensitive information until it was discovered. So if you uploaded a document to SharePoint and there was sensitive information in there that adhered to a DLP policy, if you shared it immediately after uploading it to SharePoint, you could sometimes sneak some data out that way through SharePoint. Exchange was much better at that. They just recently announced that now they have sensitive by default has been released in SharePoint Online. So this says that if you do have some of those DLP policies, access will be blocked by default to documents uploaded to SharePoint until that DLP scan has been done and determined that it's safe or that it's not safe. So there's all that type of stuff that Microsoft just continues to roll out too, as it relates to some of that security, some of that compliance, and really trying to make sure all your data is secure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it all comes back to just understanding the way these things work, whether it's Azure or Office 365, right? So like, I could go back to your conditional access thing. So conditional access is something that is not evaluated until a user has already authenticated to the service. So like in your case where you were talking about having to be VPN'd in and come from a certain IP, you had actually already had a valid set of credentials and you had come through and you'd been authenticated to that, but conditional access was an authorization mechanism to get you in, right? So people get freaked out by conditional access because they go, all right, I configured named locations or trusted locations, and now all of a sudden I still see people logging in from China. Yes, you do. Like, I get that you blocked it or you blocked Nigeria or whatever it was. And yes, those people can still log in because that's the way conditional access works. It is a post-authentication evaluation. And if somebody had just told them that up front, that's the way it works, you could probably explain a lot of it away, right? And ease some of that fear as they get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question, Brian. A non-admin, we have guest access turned on in Teams and SharePoint, so they're able to add those external guest users. Can you see from the admin side who has been added as a guest into what team? Is this easy to find? Let me rack my brain through the reports. I'm going to say no. There's a couple ways you could go about doing this. The unified audit log will show some of that in terms of when guests have been added and what they're accessing and what they're able to see. But it's not going to be a report. It's going to be something you're going to have to search for. That does have APIs available. You can write PowerShell scripts against it. There are ways to go pull that information out of the unified audit log, but there's not really a report there by default. The other thing you could do is just write a PowerShell script. So if you were looking at the sessions earlier, when I did the sprawl session, this is something you could leverage Azure Automation for. And writing a PowerShell script that essentially goes through and loops through all your sites, looks at security, and creates a report for you of external users and where they have access. You can pick them out easily because they have the pound, I think it's pound.ext pound in their username. So it's definitely something you could find. There are some third-party tools out there as well that have some of this reporting in there. I know ShareGate has a tool. There's also a free one that does pull some reports from the Unified Audit Log, and I can't remember what it is right now. This is one of the disadvantages of live, is it's a little harder to search for this and put it in the show notes. But if you go back and look at this episode, we'll try to find that one and link it in the show notes. Or if somebody in the chat knows what it is or remembers it, or can look for that reporting tool, I think it's out on GitHub. It's an open source one. But it's not going to be something that is just natively available that I can think of or that I'm aware of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, it's not in the current reports, but like you said, I think you just sling a little bit of PowerShell for that. And if PowerShell isn't your jam, and
there's a micro job for that.
There probably is a micro job for that.
Job for that.
Yeah, I'm sure Ben has a micro job for that. But realistically, I bet you could post that question to a forum. Like you could post that on the tech community, and I bet you somebody could answer it for you pretty quickly. And most of those people are pretty nice. They might even write the script for you, or there might be existing things on the PowerShell gallery or something like that already out there.
Yep, exactly. I don't think we have any other questions in there. We have some more news we could talk about for a few more minutes. I'm supposed to pick a winner out of all of these comments that we've had. Do you know how many comments have gone through while I'm trying to talk and think and read at the same time?
Yeah, I've just been watching them kind of like flitter by. That's why my eyes have gone crossed and sideways and all the things in and out.
As you're looking at, I said I have the same thing. I have 3 different monitors with different stuff that I'm using for all of this on each monitor, so eyes go all over the place. PowerShell 7. Since we were just talking about PowerShell, we already hit that one, that security one. You want to talk about PowerShell 7.0?
Sure.
And I'm going to look through these comments so I can start prepping to pick a winner.
All right. You go ahead and do that. So PowerShell 7 has gone ahead and GA'd. And this brings a couple of things along the way with it. So you can think basically PowerShell that is based on .NET Core. So it is 100% cross-platform. So think like PowerShell Core or .NET Core in the back of your head, runs on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And from 7.0, you're effectively into the track now for PowerShell, where this will be the one version of the truth or the one true version of PowerShell moving forward. Like this is just the way functionality is going to go and the way things are going to work. So there's a bunch of ancillary tooling that has already been updated to support PowerShell 7. One of the biggest ones that I work with every single day is Azure Cloud Shell. So PowerShell 7 is deployed into the latest Azure container instances that spin up when you light up a Cloud Shell. That's all good, all ready to go. Because it is still .NET Core based, like one of the weird things that we ran into in the past with versions of PowerShell was, we had PowerShell based on .NET Framework, and then we had PowerShell based on .NET Core, and it was really weird to run them side by side, and you can't run them in the same session, and you kind of had to pick and choose, especially if you were on Windows. So there's still a couple modules and a handful of products that don't support .NET Core. So things like PowerShell for the graph, Office 365 comes to mind with some of their kind of native commandlets that aren't PowerShell Core ready. But if you still load those modules up, particularly on a Windows PC, what they've done is they've added a flag in there now. So when you do import module, you can use Windows PowerShell. So there's just a switch on there. It's just a quick Boolean for you. So like, yes, I would like to use Windows PowerShell. And when you do that and you're importing a module that is quote unquote legacy, or it's something that has a dependency on .NET Framework and not .NET Core, they're actually creating a proxy module on the fly. And they can use a local Windows process to implicitly run commandlets through that proxy module. So now you can mix and match your kind of new latest and greatest commandlets and your old school, maybe they don't support the latest and greatest things along the way, which is kind of nice. One of the other things that happened along the way here is they've brought back support on Windows for things like out grid view. So having access to WPF controls and other things, and having some of those tie-ins through the proxy to Windows is letting them bring back some native Windows functionality that had been chunked out in favor of putting things into PowerShell just to make it explat and kind of get it out there and ready to go. So if you're running it today, you can go ahead and upgrade. If you do upgrade and you're running on Windows, one of the things I ran into when I ran it on my box is in Windows Terminal. So I've kind of gotten away from just the PowerShell prompt, and I've gotten away from the ISE, and I'm doing everything through Windows Terminal and kind of Windows Terminal integrated through VS Code and things like that. Your PowerShell profile is still going to point to the old PowerShell core for PowerShell 6, but you can go ahead and update your settings and just point it to the new V7 directory, and it'll go ahead and load things up and run just like it always has in all its greatness.
Now, if only PowerShell 7 would run all the Office 365 modules on my Mac, I would be happy.
So no,
Yeah, I know.
They did say as part of the announcement, actually, they specifically called out a couple of places or things that they're looking at. So things like Office 365 and the graph commandlets were 100% called out as, hey, we're reaching out and working with these teams. For Office 365, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but one of my favorite things to do there is just not even bother sometimes with the Office 365 commandlets and see if I can get by with the Office 365 CLI, which is an open source project that's based on Node and kind of runs anywhere. So like one of the things I like to do for those couple times that I do have to touch on Office 365 tenants, I really like to, I'm a huge fan of Cloud Shell. So I've installed the Office 365 CLI, which is that open source node project inside of Cloud Shell. So a lot of the things that I would potentially need the Office 365 commandlets to do, I can just do natively inside of Cloud Shell through that project. And that's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I need to spend some more time with the CLI. I've been doing PowerShell for so long that I'm stuck in my ways.
I think once you get it into something like Cloud Shell, it starts to click and maybe be a little bit more turnkey. So for me, I mean, when I'm traveling, I'm on my iPad most of the time. So I live in things like Cloud Shell through the Azure app, just so I can have access to Bash and PowerShell on my iPad. And it's just a nice turnkey thing. I can go into the app, fire up Cloud Shell. I've got my keyboard attached, type out whatever I need to do, and it's all set.
Yep. There was something else I was going to say, and I completely lost it. Oh, somebody, I didn't notice this before. You copied me with your paint. Gunk said he thinks we're streaming from the same house because we have the exact same wall paint.
We are not streaming from the same house. We live about 30, 40 minutes apart.
Yeah, watch. I'm going to stick my hand, which hand does this hand, over into Scott's screen. Nope, it didn't work. My hand just got chopped off. Yes, we are in the same city, but we are, probably a good 30 or 40 minutes apart. Apparently, we just like the same wall color.
Mine came this way, so.
I painted mine this way. And I did not live in your house before I lived in this house either. So we should probably wrap this up. We're supposed to be down to like 4 minutes. Does this mean we have to pick a comment winner?
Yes, Mark said that you have to.
Document. Do you want to pick one? Do you have any votes on any of those?
I don't. You said you were going to do it while I was talking.
You
so
don't?
I haven't paid any attention.
You're highlighting some.
I was going back and looking at the questions. There was a question from Greg. Did I miss PowerShell 6? No, you didn't miss it. That was just PowerShell Core. It was kind of in the middle.
Yeah, it just kind of sat somewhere in there. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Put it in the randomizer.
Greg, we could put it in the randomizer, although Greg told me not to pick his. He said pick the other Gregs. I could just say Greg, and then Mark would have to pick between one of the plethora of Gregs that are in here.
Yeah.
Let's go with Brian. Someone said Brian's. The ADD keeps tracking back to Ben's shirt appearing backwards because you're the one that got me to mess up our live stream to actually go switch and try to fix that.
Yeah,
So
well,
we will give Brian the award for the comment that got us the most distracted enough to mess up our live stream.
there you go. Congrats, Brian.
You are a winner, Brian Hayes. Mark will get in touch with you. Mark will give you that conference pass or the all access pass to the
GlobalCon
2, which is, we have the dates here. He sent them to me this morning. June. June. It's right after my birthday. June 15 through 17, maybe? Something like that. June 15 through 18. Here it is, June 15 through 19. I'll get it eventually. Oh, there you go. And Mark put it in there. So, yes, June 15 through 19, GlobalCon 2. We'll be doing a cage match or two. So if you're interested in being on a debate panel and you're friendly and aren't going to start fighting, let us know. Let Mark know. And we will get you in on one of those cage matches. And maybe we'll do another podcast. Who knows? It will be a good time no matter what we do. So I think that'll about wrap us up so we can cut this off before the time we're supposed to end. And if you want to listen to more, go subscribe. I saw Mark put it in the podcast comments. If you're listening to this after the fact, you missed out on a great GlobalCon1. Maybe we'll be around on GlobalCon2. And hey, here comes all the comments about the dates. Hey, Dab, June 13 is my birthday. You should get an award just for including my birthday in the conference. Yeah, if you're listening to this after the fact, this was streamed live in GlobalCon1. Maybe we'll do it again in GlobalCon2. It'll be on YouTube too, so if you do want to go look at it, watch the video again. But other than that, thanks a lot, everybody, for coming. Hope you all enjoyed it. And let us know if you have any other questions or topics you want us to cover on a future episode. And we'll wrap it up with that. Oh, do you have more?
I mean, I was going to say, if anybody does, you can go to the website. There's a contact form. Let us know questions. We do this podcast every week. As Ben mentioned, we try and keep it under a half hour an episode. So nice, quick, easy in and out, and hopefully consumable. But if you do have anything particular you want to hear about, let us know. Or you can always contact us on Twitter as well. So we're just at MS Cloud IT Pro over there.
They're all right down in this. I don't know where my hands are in relation to the video. Right down here. Website, Twitter handles, all of that. So, all right. Thanks, Scott. We'll talk to you again next week.